Hi, I'm Georgette Miller and welcome to our show. Now, as you guys know, I'm an attorney. I've been practicing for 12 years and I started my own practice in 2008. And I started this practice with a desire basically to help you guys, give you guys the necessary tools in a real rudimentary way without all the highfalutin talk and all the gobbledygook that seems to go over even my head. But give you tools that you can hold on to, put it in your tool belt so that you can have a better financial future. You can take active steps. You don't have to wait for anybody to tell you what to do, or at least arm you so that you can have the right questions or know the right questions to ask so that you can basically chart a better financial path for you. Let's roll. Today's topic is, okay, I've listened to Ms. Miller, I've filed bankruptcy, I've gotten rid of the debt, now what? This episode we're going to talk about what happens after, basically live after you file bankruptcy and gotten rid of the debt. Now, the things to keep in mind is, after bankruptcy, now you're debt-free. You've gotten a fresh start. You're coming out basically like a clean new penny, I like to say to my clients. What do I do now? What is available to me now? What credit can I access? What credit can't I access? How does it affect my job? How does it affect my spouse? How does it affect my family? And that's what we're trying to talk about today. What comes next? We'll be right back. There are many of us that believe we're rich. Why are we rich? We have the 4-bedroom, 3.5 bathroom house. We have the 2-car garage that has two $70,000 cars in there. We carry Louis Vuitton pocketbooks. We dress in the flyest threads, but at the end of the week, when we get paid, we have to pay Mary, Jose, and the 12 disciples, right? We have to pay everybody, their mother, their cousin, and their wives and friends at 29%. So we have the trappings of wealth. We rich. We think we are ballers, right? Let me tell you who is a baller. The kid that comes out of college, got their first job, saved, and got an apartment or a house they could afford. And what did I say? We're going to get into the house or the apartment you can afford. He or she then saved and bought a car cash that she could afford, or he could afford. They walked into the store and bought their suits cash. Why? They couldn't buy 10 suits, even though it would have been nice to buy 10 suits, but they would have to charge to get the 10 suits. They bought 1 or 2, what they could afford. Why is this individual a baller? A true baller. Because when he or she gets her check, it's hers. The person that bought the 10 suits, or the person that's living in the $500,000 home with the two $70,000 cars with the Louis Vuitton pocketbooks and the fly threads, when they get their check, they have to pay everybody and their mother. Let me tell you, that person is not a baller. That's a baller on a budget. And they're on a budget because they have to pay everybody. They cannot pay themselves first. They've set up their lives so that they're constantly in debt. And that's what I see this all the time in the African American, the black, the minority, the black and brown communities, where when you look at them from the outside looking in, they look rich, right? They look like they have all the trappings of success. But when you peer behind the veil just a little bit, you see they're indebted to everyone. They went into debt to create this lifestyle. This is crazy. We got to get a new money mindset. We got to understand how money works, and we have to understand the difference between wealthy and being rich. Welcome back. Now we're going to get into the weeds of it, or the nitty-gritty, whatever. But we're going to really get into your fears and the issues that you may or may not face after filing bankruptcy. Now, the fact is that last year, 1.4 million families filed for bankruptcy protection. And they went in, they got their discharge if they filed a 7, and they're in their payment plan at this point if they're in a 13. But somehow this 1.4 million families filed, and they've moved on with their lives. Not much has happened, but there is this fear that is still out there. And we're going to get into what actually happens. You filed. Your debt is now discharged. So your income has remained intact. And your potential for income has remained intact. But the unsecured debts, everything other than basically domestic support obligations and student loans, original gangsters, are gone. What do I do now? Now, you've been told for the next 7 years you won't be able to do anything, hogwash, and we'll get into that. What's going on at this point is you're going to get actually bombarded by credit card applications to acquire new credit. Yes, after bankruptcy, you actually have the ability to acquire new credit. And your credit lenders are looking at you this way. Let's step into the shoes of our lenders. Prior to filing bankruptcy, you had debt and you have income. Now you just have income. And if you filed a Chapter 7, you really can't file again for another 8 years. So you're basically fresh meat. You're actually new red meat. You have been given a fresh start to get yourself right back into the scenario you were in before. Stay with me, yes. I see you guys, your eyes rolling over into your heads and you're thinking, no way. But yes, step into your lender's shoe. If I'm a lender, I'm not gonna lend to you with you having all these other obligations. Now you don't have the other obligations anymore. I'm more willing to lend to you because now you have money, because you still have your income or your potential for income to pay me back. Now, how do you recover over time? I feel like the recovery after bankruptcy is almost immediate because once you've gotten that discharge order from the judge, your debts, your unsecured debts are basically gone. And the bankruptcy court is saying, okay, you now for the next 8 years have to act responsibly. Remember, your credit score, most people find that their credit scores are back in the high 600s. In some cases in the low 700s, within a year to 2 years after filing. So now, for the most part, the credit world, it's like, you're now Moses and the Red Sea has been parted, and you can make your way to new credit. But if you've listened to our episodes, and if you've watched us over the last 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 episodes, you know our mantra is this. Even though the waters and the Red Seas have been parted and all this new credit will be made available to you, don't get yourself back into that situation. Also, you qualify for a new mortgage 2 years from the date of you filing or you receiving your discharge. So basically about 2.5 years after you filed your Chapter 7. Take on new credit responsibly. After bankruptcy, you have given a fresh start, and that's what it means. You have new opportunity to credit. You have new opportunity to buy a home. You have new opportunities to all these things are being made available to you. Use it responsibly. And the best credit, in my opinion, is having no credit at all. What do I mean by that? We're going to go right back into it. Cash still works. If you can't pay for it cash, guess what? it ain't for you. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Now, this is the portion of the show where we take questions from you, the audience. And our first question comes via Facebook, and it's from Benny. Benny asks, what ailments does my bankruptcy status create for me as an individual? Well, Benny, I'm going to give it to you straight. On those 3 credit reports that you have with TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax, there's going to be a notation on your credit reports indicating that you filed a bankruptcy. And that notation will stay on your credit report for 7 to 10 years or thereabouts. But the notation on your credit report really has no effect or very little effect on your credit score. Stay with me. Your credit score is based on, and we said this in another show, the 2 variables that you want to keep your eyes on is your income or potential for income and debt ratio, your DTI, debt to income ratio. Amount of income you have, amount of debt you have. Once you file the bankruptcy, the debt is gone. So now you have income, and your debt to income ratio now looks great because you have income but no debt. And the number, your credit score, will continue to rise over time. In some cases, people find that it goes up by 100 to 200 points after filing. So, after filing bankruptcy, there will be a notation on your reports, but the score will not necessarily be affected by the fact that you filed bankruptcy. The two big variables on that are amount of debt you have now gone and your income.
Questions you want answered? Connect with Georgette on Facebook.
Now we're going to go to Seth on the phones. Seth, what's your question?
Hey, Georgette. Could my personal bankruptcy potentially hurt my spouse?
Oh, Seth, that's a great question. Seriously, this is a question I get in my practice all the time. Your spouse, your children have nothing to do with an individual filing bankruptcy. When an individual files bankruptcy, their Social Security and all the debts relating to that Social Security is discharged. However, that individual, I can't say this clear enough, that individual's bankruptcy, if they're married, has nothing to do with their spouse. Their spouse, if that spouse has debt, they still have to contend with their creditors unaffected. And if that spouse has a credit report, that credit report and credit score stays unaffected by the individual filing bankruptcy. Now, when does the two come together? The two comes together when one individual files for bankruptcy, but there's an underlying debt that's owed by both parties. And what's the effect? The effect is this. The individual who has filed bankruptcy is protected from that debt. However, that the individual that does not file is not protected from that debt and has to continue making the payments and continues to be liable for that debt. But what I need to distinguish is the individual that has filed bankruptcy, on their credit report, it should say Chapter 7, Chapter 13 filed. The individual that hasn't filed should have no notation at all because that individual has not filed. So think of yourself as two insular beings, which you are. There's no merging. You filed, bankruptcy has covered you. Your spouse has not filed, bankruptcy has not covered them, and there should be no notation that they have filed bankruptcy on their credit report as well. Hopefully this is clear. Once spouse filed, they're protected, they're notated, or there's a notation on their credit report. The other spouse has not filed, no notation, but they also continue to have the liability for a debt that both individuals are obligated to pay. We'll be right back. Think about this. If you file a bankruptcy and you owe the IRS money on your tax refund or return or whatever, and that debt is more than 3.5 years old, you could file a bankruptcy and have it discharged, meaning the IRS could never come after you for that money. With student loans, you have to be crippled from the neck down before you can get rid of it. You have a kid that comes out of school with a law degree in basket weaving, right? His job is going to pay him $10, $12, $13 an hour, but he has student loans in excess of $250,000. How is that kid going to pay it back? And that kid has no ability of getting rid of that debt. There's no way they can walk away and say, plead to the federal government and say, I can't pay this back, cut me a break. You're a kid, you come out with $250,000 in loans. That's before you eat. That's before you buy food. That's before you save. That's before you get a mortgage for your house. So straight out of the gate, you owe someone $250,000 with interest. If you were to pay off $250,000 over 30 years, you're still making payments of somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe $2,000 a month. Think of having to turn over $2,000 a month out of your check before you eat. You know, I have people walking into my office and they said, I'll ask, did you save for your baby's education? They were like, no, because, you know, when they go to school, they will get loans. No. No. And why I say no is if you save $100 a month in a 529 or something from the day the child is born, you theoretically could have somewhere in the neighborhood of $150,000 when baby is 18. So then you're writing checks. You're not going to FAFSA, NOFA, nobody. You just write your check and sending your kid to school. Another thing you have to think about is this. Your kid comes out of college with $200,000 in student loans, right? You have other children that walks out of college with nothing because their parents prepared for what was to come. So, 2 kids come out, same degree, same grades, same job, paying the same money. One comes out with no debt, the other with student loans. The kid that comes out with no debt moves on with their lives. They're able to save for their retirement straight out of the gate. They can save for the purchase of their home straight out of the gate. They can pay for their wedding straight out of the gate. They can start their lives right away. The kid that comes out with debt has to wait. They have to wait because they have this morass or this albatross hanging around them called student loans. Those of you who haven't saved, didn't put any money away, avoid taking the student loans out by doing what? Look at community colleges, work-study programs for the school, grants, scholarships, whatever you can use and whatever resources are out there, make use of them. Guys, we have this great new tool for you. It's a debt calculator. And what it does is it gives you the opportunity to see how much money is leaving your wallet for your wants, your necessaries, and in some case, foolishness. Go to Wild Media TV and click on the Georgette button and go ahead and play with it. Have your come to realization moment. And I'll see you on the Georgette Show. Okay, now we're at my favorite part of the show. This is where we demystify the foolishness. And I basically give it to you straight. Now, you've been told your entire life by they and them that bankruptcy is this horrible thing, but you took the step and you did it. You've also been told your entire life that you are ruined for the next 7 to 10 years. We've talked about and discussed this is foolishness. Most people find that after filing bankruptcy, their credit scores goes up by 100 to 200 points because they've released, got discharged, eliminated their unsecured debts. And what is your credit score based on? Your debt, income. Now you have income, but no debt. So the Red Sea has been parted, and creditors who never looked at you before and wouldn't give you once look over are now actually encouraging you to come back. Come back and get yourself back into this trap of you borrowing at high interest rates. So yes, you'll be able to borrow because your credit score is going to go up shortly thereafter, and you qualify for a mortgage about 2.5 years after filing. Also, we've demystified the fact that if you file, it has an effect on your spouse. It does not. Only way your spouse is affected is if you and your spouse has debt together and one spouse files and the other spouse doesn't file. One spouse is protected, the other spouse isn't protected. The spouse that files will have a notation on their credit report that they filed. There will be no notation on the non-filing spouse's credit report because they have not filed. However, the non-filing spouse continues to remain liable for the debt. So if the non-filing spouse actually continues to pay, they will be noted on their credit report that they've continued to pay this debt, even though the filed spouse no longer pays anything. So guys, reject everything you've heard. You are not thrown into debt or credit purgatory for 7 to 10 years. Bankruptcy gives you what it says it would, a fresh start. You come out like a clean new penny, have new access to debt, go out and buy yourself a home 2.5 years later. The notation of you having filed bankruptcy on your credit report will have no or very little effect as to your access to new capital. You know, bankruptcy is not just for GM. It's for everybody. It's a business tool for everybody to get their lives together. GM filed bankruptcy in 2008. They're now the #1 car manufacturer in the world. You have that right. Use it. We'll be right back. All right, guys, what have we learned today? We've learned that, one, you have the ability to file bankruptcy, but most importantly, once you file, you're not somehow stuck in this purgatory for 7 to 10 years. The opposite is actually true. The intent of the bankruptcy code is to give you a fresh start, and a fresh start is what you will have. You'll have access to new capital. You'll have the ability to buy a home in 2.5 years if you file a Chapter 7. It's like the Red Sea is parted and credit is now available to you. But what do we talk about day in and day out in the show? Simply because you have access to credit doesn't mean that you should be actually getting this credit. Cash still works. Cash is still king. If you walk into a store and you cannot afford to pay for it with your ATM debit card or a check, then probably it is not for you. You've been given this release. You've been given this new rebirth from credit and debt. Don't go back into it, because once you file, you cannot file again for another 8 years. Therefore, if you avail yourself of this new credit that will be thrown at you, and you accept it and you find yourself in over your head again, you just got, as my younger sister will say, because you have no way out for another 8 years. Guys, as they say in my country, walk good, and I'll see you guys next week.